Hello, everyone. It's been a while. I hope you guys are doing well. Today's story is a BL fantasy. It's about a guy who takes care of his niece, and they have powers. That's all you need to know before you start listening. I hope you like it.
Chapter 1. The bell above the door jingled. Small footsteps weaved between the snack aisle and the register. Uncle Lin! Jinglei skidded to a stop at the counter, her backpack slung over her shoulders, cheeks pink from running the 2 streets between the school and the store. I finished ringing up the man in front of me, slid his bag of tapioca chips and peach soda across the counter, and turned to my niece. You're supposed to go straight home. She responded with a big grin. At 28, a bachelor with 2 jobs, I'd taken her in when she was only a few months old. My sister had died bringing her into the world, and the man who was supposed to be her father had gone and drowned himself in alcohol not long after. Jinglei's father's side of the family hadn't even offered a token gesture. My own parents lived a city away. They'd relocated there not long after I finished school because the cost of living was cheaper, working themselves thin just to keep their heads above water. They couldn't take in a newborn any more than I could have, but I did it anyway. Someone had to, and I loved my sister too much to let her daughter grow up in some institution. 6 years later, I could pat myself on the back and say I was doing a good enough job, even if it wasn't the best. A customer came up with a basket of instant noodles and silken tofu, and I scanned and bagged them while Jinglei hummed to herself, swinging her feet on the little stool behind the counter. When the customer left, I turned back to her and frowned. Her wrist was bare. Jinglei, she winced. I reached into my pocket where I always kept a spare and pulled out a plain bracelet, dull silver, threaded through with a hair-thin filament I couldn't have named if you paid me. I had a dozen of them stashed in a drawer at home. I clasped it around her small wrist, the exact same one on my own wrist. Didn't I tell you to keep this on at all times? She peeked up at me through her lashes. Sorry, Uncle Lin. I couldn't stay mad at that face for more than a minute. I sighed. Just don't forget again. She promised, then hopped off the stool and skipped toward her favorite aisle, the one lined with varieties of cup noodles. A moment later, she came trotting back, 2 jumbo cups of instant chicken noodles in her arms. Let's have this for dinner! I should have said no. A growing girl needed fruits and vegetables. Fine, but only if you eat 5 spinach leaves with it. She nodded so fast her twin ponytails bounced. After my shift ended, we walked home together. Our apartment was 1 street over from the store. It was small, 1 bedroom that I'd given to her, with me on the pullout in the main room, but it was warm and it smelled like home. I boiled water, dropped in the noodles, and steamed a handful of spinach on the side, making Jinglei scrunch her nose. After a satisfying dinner, we washed up and I sat cross-legged on the floor while she knelt behind me with her little plastic comb, dragging it through my hair. I returned the favor after, working the comb gently through her tangles. Uncle Lin, will you never cut your hair? Maybe when I'm older. But you're already old. I gasped and set the comb down. You'll pay for that. She shrieked and tried to scramble away, but I caught her and tickled her sides until she was breathless with laughter. Chapter 2. The call came a little past 4 p.m. I almost didn't answer. It was an unknown number, and I had 4 customers lined up with baskets full of groceries. But something made me pick up anyway. Is this Lin Hou, guardian of Jinglei Hou? My stomach dropped. Yes, who is this? Where's Jinglei? She's safe. She's been brought in by our office. I'll let you speak with her. There were some muffled voices, and then her small voice came through. Uncle Lin? The relief that hit me was so sharp, it almost hurt. Jinglei, are you hurt? Are you okay? Are you still wearing the bracelet? I'm okay. I'm sorry, Uncle Lin. I took it off to wash my hands, like always, and I forgot to put it back on. It's still on the sink at school. I asked her how she got there. When I was walking home, A man came out of a car and said you were at the hospital and that you'd asked him to come pick me up. My blood went cold. I was already yanking off my apron. Which building did he take you to? The man with the mustache said it was the Jade. My stomach dropped even further. I knew exactly where that was. The building was practically a landmark. There's a lady here too, and everyone's really polite, she added, like that was meant to reassure me. They'd lied to her, told a 6-year-old that her uncle was sick just to get her into a car without a fight. I didn't hear much else. I told her I was coming right now, and then I was apologizing to the customers, shouting at Lei, the part-timer stocking shelves to take over the counter. The Jade was a gleaming glass tower I'd passed 100 times, government-owned, privately managed. The thought of someone bringing Jinglei here, of some stranger putting his hands on her and driving her off in a car, made something ugly coil in my chest. Government business or not, my blood was boiling by the time I reached the front desk. The receptionist made a call, and an official came down to escort me to the 5th floor. I demanded to see Jinglei immediately. He promised I would after we discussed a few important details first. 3 men and a woman sat behind a long table. They asked whether I'd noticed anything unusual about Jinglei. According to the official records, her results came back clean, one of the men said, tapping a folder. But one of our drones picked up light readings over her school a few weeks back, and the handheld detector our officer was carrying when he brought her in vibrated the moment she got within range. Did you know your niece is a light? I don't know what you're talking about. I kept my voice level even as I started to sweat. They kept at it, circling, pressing, dressing up the same questions in different clothes and asking them again. I held my composure as long as I could. I really did try, but when one of the men leaned back and mused that perhaps it would be best if Jinglei were kept separate from me for observation purposes, something in me snapped. I brought my fist down on the table. The wood splintered. A deep, jagged crack ran clean through the surface, so deep the table was barely holding together. My fist was still glowing faintly where it rested against the wood. Nobody spoke for a second. Then the woman's eyes went very wide, flicking from the broken table to me. "You're a light too," she breathed. I closed my eyes in defeat. There was nothing to say. I'd spent years being careful, so careful, and I'd undone it in one moment of fury in front of the exact people who least needed to know. But they let me see Jinglei, finally. She was sitting in a side room with a bag of chips, crumbs dusted around her mouth. I almost laughed, despite everything, the tension in my shoulders easing a fraction at the sight of her unbothered smile. "Uncle Lin, do you want some?" She held the bag out to me. I thought about slipping the bracelet off my own wrist and onto hers, but it was already far too late for that. I knelt down and hugged her instead. Chapter 3. They kept us there for 2 days. Jinglei and I were housed in a 5-star hotel, a few blocks from the Jade. They ran her through tests, scans, and reflex measures and things involving glowing panels she had to place her palm against, and ran me through the same. I stayed close to her every second they'd allow it. By the end of the 2nd day, we both had official documents. Jinglei Hou, light. Lin Hou, light. One of the men who'd interrogated me came to deliver the results. I have to wonder how you managed to evade detection for this long. I kept my mouth shut, shrugging with a wondering expression. I wasn't about to tell him about the bracelets, the small, unremarkable pieces of metal that had let us both walk past every hidden sensor and detector in this city for years. I'd gotten them from an old man 8 years ago. I was walking home from a closing shift when I came across 2 men attacking an elderly man in an alley. I had grabbed the nearest one by the collar and thrown him bodily into a wall. I remembered my hands glowing gold as I fought off the second man, remembered feeling stronger than I had ever been, remembered the 2 of them fleeing, both bleeding. When I looked down at myself afterward, I was unscathed. Not a scratch. The old man had stared at me in awe. Coming down from the adrenaline, I realized I'd somehow become a light. I'd knelt right there on the pavement and begged him not to tell anyone what he'd seen. I wanted a simple life. I wasn't a fighter. The only two fights I'd ever been in were breaking up a bully in 6th grade and this. I didn't want to be enrolled anywhere, tested for anything, turned into some government asset. All I wanted was a simple life, my jobs, a roof over my head, and enough left over each month to send my parents a small allowance so they wouldn't have to stretch quite so thin. The old man had laughed and patted my shoulder. Turned out he was the head of a local syndicate, and the men who jumped him were rivals looking to settle a score permanently. He promised my secret was safe, and true to his word, he connected me with a man who made a very particular kind of bracelet, built to scramble the readings of any light-detecting sensor, public or official, not sold on any shelf, not known to the average person. He told me I could order as many as I wanted, free of charge, for as long as I lived. I'd taken him up on it more than once. When I first felt the telltale signs stirring in 3-year-old Jinglei, a warmth in her small hands, and how they'd glow faintly just for a second or two, I made sure her test came back clean, too. I didn't want her locked into the government's boarding schools before she was old enough to choose that life herself. I didn't want either of us fighting shadows until retirement, not if I could help it. Lights were rare, barely 2 in a million, and even fewer were on official records. The rest hid like we had or disappeared into underground fights, and worse, the government wanted every one of them accounted for, which was exactly why they'd started hiding detectors and sensors in public spaces in the first place, tucked into street lamps, drones, entryways, trying to catch the ones who wouldn't come forward on their own. And the reason they wanted us so badly wasn't complicated. We could fight shadows. Shadows didn't care about laws or borders. They slunk out once daylight had fully faded, jagged-toothed things born, as far as anyone could tell, from the accumulated misery of all negative emotions, every scrap of despair and rage and grief and quiet, unspoken hopelessness, curdling, festering in the dark until it took on teeth and hunger and a will of its own. They had no fixed shape, just shifting, jet-black masses that seemed to writhe and reform with every movement. They fed on life itself, leaving husks behind, sunken-eyed, hollowed out, and nothing fought them back except us, lights. I shuddered. Standing there with those papers in my hand, I already knew what came next. They'd want me to fight. Eventually, they'd want Jinglei to fight, too. For one wild second, I thought about running, grabbing her hand and just leaving, disappearing somewhere they'd never look. But a life on the run was no life at all, and I couldn't do that to a 6-year-old. Chapter 4. The next morning, they laid it all out. Jinglei would be enrolled in the boarding school for young lights. I would be enrolled in the Light Academy, the training program for adults. I'd known this was coming from the moment that table cracked under my fist. And still, hearing it said out loud stung. A deep ache of regret pooled in my heart, regret that I hadn't managed to protect her longer. I turned to look at Jinglei. Her smile was gone. Will we no longer live together? Her eyes were already filling. I could barely get the words out steady. We'll still see each other. I didn't care what the visitation rules said. I would see her as often as she wanted me to. She held it together until we were led out into the corridor, and then the dam broke. She started crying, and I dropped to my knees and pulled her into me, letting her cry into my shoulder, while I promised her over and over that I'd visit, that I'd bring her favorite cup noodles, that this wasn't goodbye. When the escort came to lead her toward the school transport, she went 2 steps, then turned and bolted straight back to me, and the man reached out and grabbed her arm hard enough that she cried out. Something in me went white hot. I shoved through 3 men who tried to hold me back like they weighed nothing at all, reaching for her, shouting for them to let her go. Then 5 more men were on me at once, dragging me down, and I hit the floor with my arms stretched toward her, my hands starting to glow with my increasing agitation. I'd never gathered energy like that before, but I'd seen the footage online, other lights blasting shadows back with nothing but light in their palms, and I was going to do the same with these people. Stop. Let him go. The voice cut through everything, and the weight on top of me vanished almost instantly. My light fizzled out. I looked up from the floor, still catching my breath, and froze. Xingxu Jin. My former classmate, we'd gone to the same high school. I hadn't seen him in years. Years ago, another classmate at a reunion had mentioned that Xingxu had turned out to be a light at 18. Now here he was, holding a hand out to help me off the floor. I took it. Thanks, I managed, then rounded immediately on the man who'd grabbed Jinglei's arm. You touch her like that again, I'll make you wish you were dead. The man, looking uneasy, murmured an apology. I crouched down and checked Jinglei's arm, turning it gently in my hands. Does it hurt? She shook her head, sniffling. It's okay, Uncle Lin. It didn't really hurt. I pulled her in against my side. Xingxu's presence seemed to smooth the whole standoff over almost instantly. A few words to the officials, and suddenly everyone's urgency to restrain me had evaporated. In the end, Xingxu accompanied Jinglei and me the rest of the way to the boarding school himself, almost 10 kilometers from the Jade. It was beautiful. Manicured grounds, clean dormitories, amenities that made our little apartment look shabby by comparison. As much as it stung my pride, I knew that Jinglei would be well cared for here. I crouched down to her height at the entrance and took both her hands in mine. Things are going to be different for a while, but you're a strong girl, and I know you're going to do well here. If there's ever a day you don't want to be here anymore, you tell me. I will come and get you, no matter what. She nodded, eyes wet, and threw her arms around my neck in a tight hug. The drive back was quiet. Xingxu insisted on taking me home to help me pack for the academy. 18 months of mandatory residence, after which I'd be free to move out on my own. I hadn't argued. I didn't have much fight left in me by that point. Packing up Jinglei's room undid me. Folding her little shirts and dresses, boxing up the stuffed unicorn she never slept without. Wait, no, I'd need to bring that to her. I found myself crying. A handkerchief appeared in my line of sight. Xingxu was crouching beside me. He started folding the next drawer over. When we finished, there was a knock at the door. Movers. Xingxu had arranged them without telling me. I thanked him. Then I remembered to text my jobs that I was relocating. No more scanning and bagging groceries behind the register. No more Saturday nights singing for tips at the bar. The one bright spot in all of it was the pay. What the government was offering was more than 10 times what I made. The apartment was cleared out within the hour, Xingxu directing the movers with a few efficient words while I called my nice landlord and told her to keep the deposit, that I'd be gone by the time she got here. She lived down the lane and had been dropping off fresh vegetables and cuts of meat at our door at least twice a month for years now, always waving off any offer to pay her back. She went quiet on the phone for a moment, then simply said to take care of myself and the girl, and to visit if I was ever back this way. I had to fight back another wave of tears. When it was all done, Xingxu drove, the mover's truck trailing behind us, and I soon realized we weren't headed toward the academy at all. I'd never been to wherever we were going, but I'd passed the direction before, and this wasn't it. Where are we going? I had you added to my team. You'll be staying with me. I turned to stare at him. What? He shrugged, eyes still on the road. You can stay at the academy dorms if you'd rather. I just thought this would be more convenient. Your car's already been dropped off there too, by the way. Before I could think too much, I found myself nodding. In the silence that followed, my mind went straight back to a stupid, drunken kiss from over a decade ago that I hadn't thought about in years. It had been the week before our final exams, senior year, the whole class blowing off steam at some dingy bar two of our classmates had gotten into on fake IDs. I'd had too much to drink, and Xingxu had been the one sober enough to walk me home after. One second we were standing outside my front door, him telling me to drink some water before I passed out, and the next I'd grabbed the front of his jacket and kissed him, clumsy and much too long. He hadn't said a word. Hadn't brought it up the next day either, or the day after that, and then exams had swallowed both of us whole, and there'd never been a right moment to bring it up again. We'd graduated, gone our separate ways, and I told myself it was better left buried. Chapter 5. I stood in the entryway of the posh villa with my worn suitcase. This place was 8 kilometers from the academy, and it was, aside from the Jade and the school, the nicest place I'd ever set foot in. 3 stories, dark stone, a garden out back that somebody clearly paid good money to maintain. Just treat it like your own, Xingxu said, and led me upstairs to show me my room. Over the following weeks, I learned the schedule of my new life. Xingxu led our team, 5 of us total, including myself, 3 men, 2 women, all of them easy enough to get along with. My days filled up fast. 7 hours at the academy, 2 of them dedicated purely to the study of shadows, far deeper than anything I'd half learned in high school, and the rest split between combat drills, energy control, and the kind of endurance training that left my legs shaking by dinner time. I already knew the basics, that shadows were born from Shanghai's own darkest emotions, fusing together into something with teeth, and that they feared daylight. There was a lot more to learn beyond that. How to engage in close combat with a shadow, which angle to strike it from, what to do if their claws connected, etc. One evening, sore-shouldered and heading for my car, Xingxu paused by his own and offered to hook me up with a car dealer he knew for a discount, so my rusty box could finally retire. I thumped the roof of my very reliable, very beloved car, one I'd gotten for an absolute steal off a second-hand lot years ago. This rusty box has been part of the family for 5 years and runs perfectly fine, thank you. He just shook his head, said the offer stood, and drove off. If I was honest, Xingxu's generosity made me uneasy. He wouldn't let me split the rent, wouldn't let me pay him back in cooking or cleaning, since he'd already hired both a cook and a maid for the villa. I also worried at how comfortable I already was. The villa, the paycheck, the cook's meals, waiting every evening. I sighed and focused on the road. At the end of the month, I made a visit to see Jinglei. I packed her favorite unicorn, 6 of her favorite cup noodles, along with 3 storybooks. She looked healthy, and she barreled into me the second she saw me. "I missed you," she sniffled into my shoulder. In the visiting room, she filled me in on everything. How well she was settling in. A scuffle she'd had with a group of older girls that ended with her using her power to hold her own, and apparently ended in friendship. I sighed and told her not to go picking fights, but if someone put their hands on her first, she was allowed to defend herself. She lifted her chin. "I know, Uncle Lin. Besides, I'm one of the strongest in my class." To prove it, she held both hands up between us, palms out, and a faint gold glow flickered to life, holding steady for a few proud seconds before fizzling out. I heaped her with praises. By the second month, I could feel the training changing my body. My waist an inch trimmer, my stamina longer, my control over my own power finally free. Also, Xingxu and I were compatible roommates, weekends spent over board games, takeout containers stacked between us. One such weekend, halfway through a game of snakes and ladders, a bottle of chilled pomegranate juice between us and a plate of smoked almonds we kept picking at, Xingxu rolled the die and asked, "Do you still kiss people when you're drunk?" I nearly choked on an almond. I don't do that anymore. I was sure I sounded resolute. Inwardly, I winced. I'd only ever kissed him because I'd had the world's most inconvenient crush on him back then, and liquid courage had done what sober cowardice never would have let me do. He just chuckled and threw the die. A few evenings later, after a rough day of training than usual, I saw Xingxu thumping the heel of his hand against his own lower back as we came in through the front door. "You good?" I asked. "Bit sore." Well over 6'2", he was probably prone to backaches. I showered and changed into my pajamas before finding myself knocking on Xingxu's door. "Want me to pop your back? I used to do it for my father. Said I'm a pro." A minute later, he was face down on his bed while I climbed up, knees braced on either side of his torso, hands finding the tight knots along his spine. I swallowed at the closeness between us. "Tell me if it hurts," I pressed down along his back. Xingxu moaned and mumbled, "Don't stop." He sounded so pleased, I grinned. After that, it became a habit. Every week or so, usually after a particularly brutal training day, he'd knock on my door with a sheepish look and ask if I had a few minutes. One morning, when I came downstairs, freshly showered, towel slung around my waist, whistling something under my breath, I stopped dead on the stairwell. I'd assumed Xingxu was still asleep. He usually didn't surface before 10 on his days off. Xingxu was very much awake, watching me from the sofa, one eyebrow raised, the corner of his mouth curled into a teasing smile. "That seems precarious," he said. I looked down at the towel, lower than I'd realized, hanging on by what felt like sheer optimism, and grabbed it in a white-knuckled fist before turning straight back up the stairs, face burning and hunger forgotten. Chapter 6. It was a pleasant Sunday. I crawled out of bed in the afternoon. I just sat down to a plate of the cook's glossy, dark, soy-glazed chicken thighs over rice steamed with garlic when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a woman. Long legs, a short, green-tiered dress, golden, voluminous hair. Even I, a man who liked men rather firmly, had to blink twice at the beauty. She stepped past me into the villa without waiting to be invited. "Is Shushu home?" she asked, settling onto the sofa like she owned it. "Shushu? You mean Xingxu?" She waved a hand. "He's been ignoring me forever. A man who doesn't know how to treat his girlfriend right is worthless. Call him down for me, would you?" I went, wondering the entire walk up the stairs why I'd never once heard that Xingxu had a girlfriend. Not that it was any of my business. I knocked 4 times before he finally opened the door, hair mussed, clearly just woken up. "Your girlfriend's here?" I kept my face perfectly pleasant. "She seems pretty upset. Good luck." I turned and left before he could respond. I ate lunch in my room. A little over an hour later, there was a knock at my door. Xingxu, inviting me down for spicy chicken wings and braised feet he'd ordered from our favorite place nearby. I was about to say I'd already eaten when I noticed the reddened patch on his right cheek, a faint handprint just visible beneath a thin scratch. I hesitated. "Did you get slapped?" He shrugged. "I broke up with Shangen." I hated the small, traitorous flicker of relief that went through me. I arranged my face into something appropriate. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. We didn't have much chemistry." The two of us headed downstairs, settling at the kitchen table where the food was waiting. "Then why get together at all? Seems like a waste of both your time." "I should have been firmer about it," Xingxu admitted. "We met on a few joint missions last year, back when shadow activity was heavy. She asked me out, said she'd be fine even if it didn't work out between us. Turns out she wasn't fine with it after all." I rolled my eyes. "Hope you learned your lesson." He huffed. "Duly noted." I got up just a sec. I got out the first aid kit, dabbed disinfectant along the scratch while he sat still and pressed a small Band-Aid over it. When I leaned back to check my work, I realized he was watching me with an intensity that made that stupid over-a-decade-old kiss flicker through my mind all over again. I cleared my throat and announced that the food was getting cold. The strange charge in the air eased, thankfully, and we ate. The unhelpful part of me wondered whether he'd broken up with her because of me. I shook my head. Nah, that was ridiculous. Each month end, without fail, I made the trip out to see Jinglei, arms full of her favorite snacks. She always looked a little taller, a little brighter than the last visit, and every time I left feeling like I could breathe a bit easier, I still worried. I suspected I'd worry about that girl until I had no breath left in me, but she was thriving, and that was all that mattered. A week later, I went on my first real mission. Chapter 7. I believed I was ready. I'd had months of training. I knew the theory cold. I could recite the vulnerable points on a shadow's mass in my sleep. But standing in front of a hissing shadow, I realized they were worse in person. 100 times worse. The creatures had pale, jagged teeth, their clawed limbs poised to slash at anyone or anything that came their way. Fighting another person, even the two real fights I'd been in before all this, meant fighting something with a face, something that bled and flinched and thought the way I did. Fighting a person and fighting this abomination were worlds apart. Too absorbed in the contrast of it all, I stood frozen. The second the creature lunged toward me, every drill I drowned my body in over the past months evaporating from my mind. The claws came within inches of my throat before Xingxu was suddenly there, driving it back with a burst of light from his palm. "You've got this!" He slapped my back, and there wasn't a shred of doubt in his voice. Shaking, I nodded. It also helped that I thought of Jinglei, further fueling my resolve. A heartbeat later, my fist connected with a creature, and it let out a screech that left my ears ringing. I landed another glowing punch. In the following seconds, it dissolved into nothing. Confidence surged in me. I moved from one creature to the next, marked by punches and kicks, carrying on the growing momentum. By the time it was over, I was breathing hard, drenched in sweat, nursing nothing worse than a handful of scratches, and proud of myself. I wanted to punch another stupid shadow. On the drive back to the Jade to file our report, the team congratulated me, and Xingxu squeezed my shoulder. I liked the pride on his face. One day, I was eating lunch in the academy canteen with the team, minus Xingxu, who'd been pulled into a meeting. Shangen dropped into the seat across from me, tray in hand, without so much as an invitation, shooing Zhou and Meng down the bench to make room. I nodded at her. She ate a few bites in silence, then looked up at me. Never could I have guessed Xingxu's type. I blinked and set down my chopsticks. Sorry? She raised an eyebrow. A dense one, too, she murmured, then stood. Since you're cute, I'll let it go. Better a man than a woman, I suppose? She gave a little wave over her shoulder as she walked off, her tray left behind. You'll take care of that for me, won't you? I sat there, staring after her. What was that about? Yi asked, voicing exactly what I was thinking. Meng shook her head. Diva. That evening, on the drive home, Xingxu at the wheel, since my own car had finally, definitively given up on life, the garage manager laughing outright when he saw the state of the engine and telling me flat out to let it rest in peace. I heard Shangen talk to you. Nothing bad happened, I assured him. Tell me if she gives you trouble, I'll handle it. That was nice of him to say. Now that I thought about it, back in high school, I developed a crush on him because he let me use his textbook when I'd forgotten mine. I tried to give it back, but he refused to take it, saying he didn't feel like attending class, and smiled when the teacher ordered him to leave the classroom. And also because he was cute and my type. Chapter 8. It was Jinglei's birthday, and the school had granted a full day of leave for the occasion. Xingxu tagged along, claiming he had nothing better to do. I'd gotten Jinglei a guitar, small enough for her hands. Xingxu produced 2 latest Barbies, and Jinglei looked between the 2 gifts like Lunar New Year had come early. Where do you want to go? I half expected her to name the biggest amusement park in the city. Noodles! She squealed, eyes sparkling. We entered a popular shop with a wall of toppings, everything from soft-boiled eggs to crispy bacon, to grilled sausages, to shredded cheese, to a dozen kinds of greens where you built your own bowl exactly how you liked it. The three of us piled our bowls rather high. Jinglei declared that this was the best birthday of her life. By late afternoon, we were strolling toward a park for one last walk before heading back when we stopped by an ice cream cart. Just as we were paying for our cones, a scream cut across the street. Then another, then the unmistakable, dreaded screech of shadows. I stood frozen. "Uncle Lin," Jinglei said, tugging my sleeve, "don't shadows only come out at night?" They did, they always had. I looked at Xingxu, who already had his phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp as he called it in. I dropped my ice cream. "Stay here," I told Jinglei, pushing her gently behind the ice cream cart. The vendor, pale and wide-eyed, nodded frantically when I asked him to keep her close. "Don't move. I mean it." Xingxu and I ran toward the creatures. As we got closer, I swore there had to be over a dozen of them, and they looked wrong even by shadow standards, uglier and larger. "They've mutated," Xingxu said grimly, confirming the fear already crawling up my spine. "They can withstand daylight now." I scoffed. I wanted to shout that it wasn't fair, bad enough having to fear the dark, and now this. But there wasn't time. I kicked a shadow off a civilian whose life was already half drained from her skin gone, frightfully pale. The mutated ones were worse, faster limbs, stretching farther than their predecessors, and took noticeably more energy to put down. Xingxu and I barely kept the horde contained until more lights finally rolled in, some of them diving straight into the fight while the rest fanned out to tend to the wounded scattered across the street, and the last of the creatures were finally cut down. I turned to run back to Jinglei and froze. A shadow had slunk out from beneath a tree, not 10 feet from the ice cream cart. I screamed her name and sprinted. But even before I reached her, I saw her small glowing fist connect solidly with the creature's elongated arm, forcing it back with a flinch. Pride and terror surged through me in the same breath. It lunged again, and by then I'd closed the distance, driving it back with a barrage of strikes until it dissolved into nothing under my hands. I checked her over immediately, hands running along her arms, her face, not a scratch on her. The ice cream vendor, shaking, showered us both with thank yous. We took a taxi. Just me and Jinglei. Xingxu had to report straight to the academy with the rest of the team for an emergency briefing. Shadows attacking in broad daylight had shattered everything the world thought it knew about them. Jinglei's hand was tucked into mine, quiet for a while. Then, out of nowhere, she tugged at my shirt, eyes shining. "I want to be just like you, Uncle Lin. You were so cool." "You were very brave today," I told her, squeezing her hand. "You protected that man." She went pink and grinned wider. "But," I added, crouching down to meet her eyes, "please don't do anything reckless again. Promise me." She promised. I watched her walk back through the school gates and let out a long breath. Things had just gotten a great deal more complicated. By the next morning, the news had already spread nationwide, a broadcast urging civilians to remain calm, that the situation was under control, that officials were monitoring the isolated incident. Then, within days, confirmation came that the same thing was happening in other towns and cities, other countries. Shadows tearing through daylight hours like the rules that had governed them for as long as anyone could remember simply no longer applied. The number of attacks climbed fast after that. Every light in the city was stretched thin, called out on back-to-back missions, barely home long enough to shower before the next alert buzzed through. Civilians were ordered to be indoors by noon. Non-essential work shifted to remote wherever possible, the streets emptying out earlier and earlier each day. Media coverage tightened right along with it. Certain words disappeared from broadcasts almost overnight. Mutation, uncontained. Anything that hinted the situation might be spiraling, every possible measure was taken in preventing panic among an already frightened population. I came home most nights bone-tired, my arms crossed with fresh scratches under the bandages, and Xingxu wasn't much better off. We'd eat whatever the cook had left warming for us, exchange a few words, and go straight to bed. One night, though, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling for what felt like an hour before giving up and creeping downstairs to the living room, flicking the TV on low. I scratched absently at the bandages lining my forearms. Those claws were sharper than anything I'd trained against, and pulled up webflix, telling myself I'd watch half an episode of a period series, Shame of Horns, and then finally drift off. I was maybe 10 minutes in when Xingxu came down the stairs with his own blanket bundled under one arm. Thought I heard something. Before I could respond, he'd settled onto the couch beside me, then, without a shred of hesitation, lay down and rested his head against my chest. I went rigid. What are you doing? I read somewhere it's good for sleep, he said, entirely matter of fact. Cuddling helps you rest better. I had no idea what I was supposed to say to that, and honestly, I didn't particularly want him to move. His weight against me was warm and grounding after a day that had left me feeling anything but, and his slow breaths against my neck were far too pleasant to complain about. I let myself relax bit by bit, and soon we fell asleep. I woke the next morning to find him still there, still asleep. I couldn't resist it. I ran a hand through his dark hair, and I froze when he stirred, murmuring something half asleep. That's nice. I like it. I went very still. A moment later, he blinked awake, got up, stretched, and said, "We should do this more often," before heading upstairs. I sat up, my heart going far too fast for a man who'd just woken up. Chapter 9. Things turned for the worse one day. We'd been called to a street downtown. Reports of shadow activity heavier than anything the sensors had logged in weeks. Their numbers were staggering, more than any of our previous missions, and the casualties climbed faster than we could hold the line. I had just finished off a shadow when I saw another shadow, larger than the rest, mutated limbs stretching unnaturally long, bearing straight down on Xingxu's back while he was locked in a strike against another creature. I moved to block the claw, taking the hit instead. I screamed as the harshest pain tore through my side. I dropped to one knee, hand pressed hard over the gash, and forced my light into the wound the way the healers at the academy had drilled into us. The effect was minimal against a wound this deep, barely enough to slow the bleeding, but it was better than nothing. I forced myself to stay calm, repeating in my head that our healing rates ran 3 times faster than an ordinary person's. Blood pooled hot and slick against my palm despite the glow, and I felt a strange, slowing sensation as I kept forcing my own energy into the wound and thought, with a rising irritation, that I didn't want to lose consciousness. Too bad, my body was done, everything went dark. I woke up a day later in a hospital bed, torso wrapped in bandages, a subdued soreness coming to life. A nurse checked my vitals, said everything looked clear. As soon as she left, I heard footsteps pounding down the hallway outside. Xingxu burst through the door. He didn't say anything at first, just crossed the room and pulled me into a careful hug, his face pressed into my shoulder. When he pulled back, his eyes were red-rimmed. "I'm glad you're awake," he said, voice rough. I just sat there, taking in how undone he looked, how unlike the composed team leader I'd gotten used to. It was mean of me, but seeing him look like this because of me pleased me. I needed to know. And before I could think better of it, I opened my mouth. "Xingxu, do you—" The door burst open. The rest of the team filed in all at once, arms full of flowers and fruit baskets. I let out a breath, somewhere between relief and disappointment, and decided to leave the question for another time. One morning, The news reported 109 deaths across the city in a single night, a number too large to soften. There was no more pretending it was under control. The government finally dropped the careful language, and the lockdown became particularly stringent. No one was allowed to go out. Grocery runs shrank to strict, narrow windows. Civilians allotted a specific hour to leave and return based on which district or building block they lived in, staggered across the day so the streets never filled up all at once. Nearly all jobs went fully remote, and only essential workers, the handful of roles a city couldn't survive without, continued in person. I hadn't been able to visit Jinglei in nearly a month by that point, and when I finally got through to her on the phone, she scolded me before I'd even said hello. "You never pick up," she huffed. "I called you 2 times last week." "I'm sorry, it's been complicated. I'll come meet you as soon as they let us." "That's okay. I heard it's dangerous now. My boyfriend is a genius," she suddenly announced, "and he has a plan to fix the shadow problem." I blinked. "Plan? Wait, boyfriend?" "Yeah, his name's Minjae. He's very cute. He said I was beautiful and—" "When did you get a boyfriend? You're 7. "Uncle Lin, please, I'm a grown lady now. Also, you should come visit and listen to Minjae. His plan's going to work, I just know it." "Okay, bye." Before I could get another word in, she hung up. Xingxu, who'd been listening from the doorway, raised an eyebrow. "Growing up fast?" "Apparently her boyfriend has a plan to solve the shadow crisis," I said flatly. He laughed. The school wasn't currently allowing general visitation, but Xingxu pulled some strings to get special clearance just for me, and I made the trip out to see Jinglei. She was waiting with the boy in question, shorter than her, glasses, a front tooth missing, undeniably the most harmless-looking child I'd ever laid eyes on. Cute, I had to admit. Jinglei sat me down on a park bench and had Minjae walk me through his plan. I listened, mostly humoring them. A 7-year-old, however sharp, wasn't likely to hand the world a breakthrough the top researchers hadn't already considered. But the longer Minjae talked, hands moving earnestly as he sketched the idea out in the air, I found myself smiling less and less and less. I didn't wait around after that. I drove straight to the Jade, found Xingxu, and told him everything. He listened, quiet and considering. "It could work," he said finally. "The heads are out of ideas. At this point, anything's worth trying." We called a meeting and presented it to the higher-ups, who reacted about as skeptically as I'd expected from a room full of officials being told a plan had come from a child. But these were desperate times. A vote was called. It passed. The research teams went to work immediately, fast-tracked in a way I'd never seen a government project move before. Approvals that would normally take months signed off in days, funding released without the usual mountain of paperwork, racing against the clock, while the rest of us kept doing what we could to hold the line, mission after grinding mission, the losses piling up faster than any of us could properly grieve them before the next call came in. It got to a point where I stopped watching the news altogether, muting every death toll update the moment it flashed across the screen. There were whispers, too, of the government debating whether to lower the minimum fighting age for lights from 18 to 16, desperate to widen the pool of people who could be sent out. It never made it past whispers. There was fierce opposition to the idea across every team I knew, and I was firmly among them. One night, it was all too much. I'd shut myself in my room after a mission that had gone worse than most. There had been children in the reports that day, some no older than Jinglei, a couple even younger, and somewhere between changing out of my gear and sitting down on the edge of the bed, I'd started crying. I didn't hear the door open. Xingxu must have heard my sobs, because the next thing I knew, he was sitting beside me, pulling me into his arms. He stayed there until I'd cried myself out, his hand steady against my back the whole time. 47 days in, morale had bottomed out across every team I knew. We were running on fumes by then, patched together with bandages and hospital visits. On one mission, I watched a member of another team simply freeze mid-fight and break down right there in the middle of it, sobbing, until his teammates had to physically pull him back out of the line. Then word came that a prototype was finished, testing scheduled within 2 weeks, and hope ignited us. 3 weeks after that, the heads gathered every team to deliver the news. The prototypes worked. Installation would begin across the city immediately, expedited block by block. Street lamps, rechargeable ones, powered by light energy channeled directly into them. Once the lamps went up, every assigned light took their turn charging them, twice a week on a rotating schedule to keep them running at full strength, just placing both palms flat against a panel built partway up the pole, roughly chest height, and letting your energy flow through until the indicator light blinked green. The entire city glowing gold through the day and the darkest hours. It worked. Attacks dropped drastically, shadows driven back to nocturnal hours only, and even the ones that did show up seemed to actively avoid the lit stretches of street, flinching back from the glow like it scalded them on contact. Missions that used to mean hours of chasing creatures through normal lit alleys turned manageable. Corner them near a lamp, let the light do half the work, finish the rest. It almost felt like we were cheating. The story spread fast. Locally, then internationally within days. Minjae received a medal and a reward large enough to make his parents cry on camera. Jinglei called me that evening, practically shouting down the phone that she was going to marry him one day. Chapter 10. With the heads suddenly buried under a mountain of international calls, video conferences with foreign officials at every hour, site visits from delegations wanting to see the lamp technology firsthand, the rest of us finally got something we hadn't had in months. A proper weekend off. The research team, riding the high of their success, had been handed a fat bonus on top of a new project, refining the lamps further, testing which materials held and released light energy most efficiently. I'd also overheard talks of portable versions, something like a gun that could store charged energy and fire at shadows. That would be extremely useful the next time I found myself surrounded. I was sure more enhancements would come in the future. I spent the better part of the afternoon in the kitchen, waving off the cook for once, insisting I wanted to do this myself, putting together a dinner with 3 of Xingxu's favorites: sweet and sour pork, the sauce tangy sweet, a tray of plump wontons, swimming in a perfect broth with scallion and chili oil, and spicy fried chicken, powdered with a local spice powder and salt. "You didn't have to do all this," Xingxu said when he came down, though the way his eyes lit up at the spread on the table told a different story. "We're celebrating," I said. "The whole city's celebrating, might as well join in." I didn't say the rest of it out loud, that some competitive part of me wanted him to enjoy my cooking more than the cook's. Years of cooking solo for Jinglei had sharpened my skills. The food disappeared fast. "You've got potential, chef," Xingxu said between bites. I grinned. We moved to the couch after the food. A bottle of wine between us? Sometime later I found myself leaning in, and he met me halfway, close enough that I could feel his breath. "You're not drunk, are you?" he murmured, a half-smile tugging at his mouth. "1 glass of wine. I'm fine." Our lips were almost brushing when both our phones buzzed at once. The cozy atmosphere vanished faster than the speed of light. Xingxu pulled back, reaching for his phone with a groan. A heavy horde had been detected at the city's edge near the old landfill, one of the last patches of the city the lamp installation hadn't reached yet. All available teams were being called in. "Later," he said, standing and already reaching for his jacket. "Later," I agreed, and we were out the door within minutes. Several teams converged on the site at once. Xingxu let out a low whistle when we reached the rise overlooking the landfill. The horde spread out below us was easily the largest I'd seen, dozens of shapes writhing, more of them mutated than not. The higher-ups had brought the military in for this one, and soldiers had set up a line of floodlights along the perimeter, stripping away as much of the dark as they could before we went in. Though they wouldn't affect the creatures, at least we could see them clearly. Stay in formation, Xingxu called to the team. Watch each other's backs. The fight was chaos from the first second. Like this was payback for how easy the earlier missions had been. Shadows always fought like a flood, a dozen threats converging from every angle at once. Clicking my tongue at the stubborn mutated ones, I took them down one after another, the glow in my fists steady. Meng went down hard against one of the larger creatures, and Yi hauled her back before its claws could connect a second time. Zhou was shouting coordinates, directing two of the newer arrivals toward a cluster, breaking off toward the perimeter fence. The air was full of screeching and the low hum of light energy. Gold flashes cut through the air like flares. My gaze snagged on movement near the floodlights. One of the soldiers backed up against the fence line, firing uselessly into a shadow that barely flinched with each shot. A couple of the men beside him had already noticed the second one closing in from the side and were unloading everything they had into it, shouting warnings that got lost in the noise. Its arm arched toward one of the men, claws long enough to do far worse than scratch. There wasn't time to shout a warning that would reach him in time. I threw myself between them, and the claw that had been meant for the soldier caught me across the midsection instead. A burning, tearing pain that stole the air straight out of me. I could only let out a weak gasp. I heard, distantly, several people shouting my name, Xingxu's voice loudest among them. I swayed, vision tunneling hard at the edges, my light sputtering against the wound. Xingxu tore into the creature that had gotten me, finishing it off in two brutal strikes. Before I could go down, he was already there, one arm hooking around me, hauling me upright against him while his other hand pressed over mine, adding his own light to the wound, trying to help hold it closed. There was so much blood this time. Far more than before. His face had gone white. Stay with me. Lin, stay with me. I wanted to tell him I was trying, but I felt myself slipping before I could get a single word out. The last thing I registered was his hand tightening around mine. Chapter 11. I came to slowly this time, the room swimming into focus in pieces. The dull white of the ceiling letting me know it was the hospital, then the ache settling deep in my midsection where the bandages pulled tight with every breath. Xingxu was already there, slumped in the chair beside my bed, head tipped back in sleep. "Xingxu!" I called out, my voice rough. He was on his feet instantly, leaning over me. "Lin, you're awake." Before I could get another word out, he was already turning toward the door, calling for a nurse, then a doctor. The doctor arrived within minutes and checked my vitals with a satisfied nod, confirming everything looked stable before stepping back out to give us a moment alone. Once alone, Xingxu licked his lips. "You were out for 3 days. I hate it when you scare me like that. 3 days, Lin." His eyes were red-rimmed and stubble covered his face. "You've got a hero complex, you know that?" I reached up and took both his hands. "I'm here. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You got clawed open and—" "I'm fine." I squeezed his hands. "So, what happened after I turned Sleeping Beauty?" He let out a breath. "The horde's been cleared, and the lamps are already going up at the landfill. The government's expanding the whole program, setting up a dedicated department just to make sure every corner of the city gets covered. The rest of the world is catching up. It's all under control, Lin." I smiled. All was good now. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I like you, Lin. I've liked you for years. Since that kiss, if I'm honest, I never stopped thinking about it. I was a coward about it back then, and then life just kept getting in the way, and I told myself it didn't matter anymore. But then I heard you'd been brought to the Jade, and I went straight there and I made sure you were put on my team because I wanted you close, because I couldn't stand the idea of you being in another team when you were so near. And I can't do this anymore. I thought it'd be best to take our time, but not anymore. I need confirmation. I need it now. Go out with me? Please say yes." I stared at him, half convinced the blood loss was making me hear things. Why else would Xingxu Jin be sitting at my hospital bedside, hands trembling in mine, asking me that? But he was still looking at me, waiting. I nodded. He leaned in immediately, and I turned my head away so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. Hurt flashed across his face. I've been unconscious for 3 days, I said quickly. My mouth probably smells like a sewer that's been left to ferment. Give me a minute. Xingxu laughed, and he helped me hobble to the bathroom sink, one arm looped carefully around my waist to keep the strain off my bandages while I brushed my teeth. The moment I turned around, he announced, "I'm going to kiss you." This time, I didn't pull away. We kissed and kissed and kissed and kissed and kissed. The end.